Let me thank you for coming on this Friday afternoon. It's not usual that we have press conferences on a Friday afternoon, but Cabinet was in fact held today, Friday, because as you are aware, the Attorney General and myself would have traveled to the Bahamas yesterday. We left here 4 o'clock in the morning and we returned just after midnight last night. And we were able to visit with our colleagues and representatives of the Bahamian government and other regional organizations, along with the chairman of CARICOM. As you're aware, I am on the Bureau of CARICOM and will become chair of the Caribbean community in January for our rotation from January to June, and therefore would have accompanied as well. But in our own deliberate efforts, we have been maintaining, perhaps more than any other issue since I have come to this office, we have had to articulate our position on climate change and the consequences of global warming to our region and to our civilization and to our way of life. Um, I've been thinking about this a lot, and just now in discussion with Cabinet, made the point that the world may well come to be regarded in the Caribbean. Our world will come to be regarded as BM and AM, before Maria and after Maria. Because, in a very real sense, it was in 2017, and some may argue had Irma and Maria, but Maria is what, more than any other, prior to Dorian, would have caused the rest of the world to fully appreciate that the intensity of these hurricanes and systems which we are facing, along with other aspects of the consequences of climate change, which includes the sargassum weed, which is having a negative impact and in some cases a disastrous impact on some businesses throughout the region. And by the region, we don't only mean the countries of the English speaking Caribbean, but we mean the entire Caribbean countries, and in fact, Mexico and others. Um, all of the Caribbean states, for want of a better phrase. And Caribbean states include the southern states of the United States of America, and even some on the eastern seaboard. So that the bottom line is that we have reached a position where, if anything else, today is to signal that we have to move forward in a different manner in how we approach our problems to this new reality. This is our new norm. In fact, more than anything else, yesterday when they kept asking us questions, the Bahamian media and the international media with whom we spoke, we made the point this is our new norm. And we have to be ready for any and all eventualities. That means that we're going to have to do things differently. And that is an exercise that, regrettably, it has taken the loss of lives and the tragedy and horror of Maria and now Dorian to reinforce. But I suspect that those people in the region who hitherto would have used the excuse of a hurricane watch or warning or tropical storm watch or warning to have a lime or effect will now understand that the days of hurricane limes and tropical storm limes really ought to be reserved only for the utter foolhardy and people who don't like themselves or their family. Because what we saw in Nassau was horrific. And what we heard with respect to the stories is equally heart wrenching. There, but for the grace of God, goes I. And that statement has more meaning for us as Barbadians than at any other time, because where was Dorian first threatening? It was Barbados. And I have reflected that the last 2 weekends really, in my mind, stand out as the tale of 2 weekends with Dorian. because the first Sunday and Monday, it was us at the end of August. And the last Sunday and Monday, it was the people of Abaco, Grand Bahama, and by wider extension, with the tropical storm winds, all of the Bahamas. And in both instances, Dorian behaved in ways that hitherto are not part of the norm. In the case of Barbados, the tale of Dorian was that this one was not dodging us, or we were not dodging that one, to put it better. It was not going to miss us like 99%, that this one was really coming at us. And Bajans saw it for themselves. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And what transpired did not in any way equate to what we know and understand what a tropical storm that was hovering on a category 1 hurricane can bring and usually brings. What transpired was, in fact, far less rain and far less wind than we would otherwise have expected, such that, not would, thank God, we did not see the scale of destruction, property damage, or injury that might otherwise have been associated with that system. What we heard and what we understood from the meteorologists was that dry air was responsible for sucking the convection out, and therefore Barbados, in spite of the fact that it was fully in the sights of the storm, got off virtually unscathed from Dorian. I've been living for 53 years, and I've been around a few storms and hurricanes. And what happened with us is almost inexplicable for me. The scientists have told us why, and some have even joked and argued that at last the Sahara dust has brought benefit to the people of Barbados, having been the subject of much much negative blame and common consequences for how people with their sinuses deal with it over the years. But that Sahara dust was able to help create the dry air that effectively denuded the power of Dorian. Jump forward a week. And the same system that behaved differently with us behaved differently now in a different way. It went in to waters, first of all, by not going over Puerto Rico and the mountains in Puerto Rico. It went in, it was able to retain its strength, but it then went into waters that are significantly warmer than they might otherwise have been, creating the perfect opportunities along with the other things like wind shear and high pressure systems and the absence of a steering current and all of that we've now learned about from the meteorologists. But worse than all of that absence of that steering system led to what? That it sat over Abaco and Grand Bahama for almost what, a 36-hour period, in circumstances when these things normally move at 8 miles per hour, 10 miles per hour. When it was down by us, it was moving at 12 miles per hour. It didn't even move at 1 mile per hour at one point. It just sat stationary. And when you hear the stories of what that meant for people, people describing it as sledgehammers not stopping, or as if they were in some kind of atomic bomb experience, and that the noise and the wind and the gust just unrelenting. Now you can imagine pain for a half hour or hour or two. Imagine that noise and the horror and everything else. And we haven't even started to add to that storm surge on low-lying countries. What is Barbados but a low-lying country? What is Bridgetown? What are the other areas that we face? So that All of that I've come to say because CNN will report to you the horror. CMC will report to you and show you the images of the horror. Social media will also do that for you. Our duty, however, is not simply to share what we saw. Our duty is to determine how we move forward. Because to sit and do nothing would be to leave our people, not just in Barbados, but the entire region, vulnerable to a fate that is worse than war. And we have a responsibility, therefore, as Caribbean people, to start to redefine how we live and how we bolster our resilience for what is clearly a new norm. My government, first and foremost, start to engage Barbadians to appreciate that how we build has to change. One of the things that came out clearly in Nassau was that a lot of the older houses, and the AG can confirm, the ones on stilts, for example, because if you're living on a low-lying island that basically has no elevations and that storm surge is going to come through, when you have the stilts, what happens? The water goes through and under. But when we want to start to look pretty and we're doing everything without reference to the risk and to functionality, to ventilation and to protection and to resilience, then we run into problems. In 1955, when Janet hit Barbados, I am told that I wasn't born a full 10 years before. And some of you may have heard me say it, and I repeat it because it has to be repeated. We lost a number of houses in this country. There was even a shelter, I am told, that people went to where more than 20 people lost their lives because the shelter was a church that was eventually taken out by Janet. And some of you journalists may want to do the research into these things. But what happened afterwards was that so many people lost their house roofs that there was a shortage of skills, and in particular carpenters. And you talk to older Barbadians across the board, and they tell you that because of that, and because of the urgency of wanting to return to normalcy, people built houses with the help of ordinary friends and family. And those friends and family who helped build the houses, who couldn't work out how to do the trusses and the physics of roofs and gable roofs or hip roofs, as I'm sure none of us who've ever built a house can do today either. What became a temporary fix, and the category of person who did it, who became known as a storm carpenter, because they were not real carpenters, became the norm for the country. Now I'm counting on you young people in this room to help spread that message. Because what the country then did for the next 60 years is to build flat roofs. Now, how many times have we seen in previous systems, Thomas and others, and you're going in north and houses lost their roofs and are all rickety? There's one in Speightstown that I remember in particular that looked as though if you touch it, the house would have fallen. But the house withstood everything. And it had the traditional gable roofs. And in those gables, what do you have? Windows, fixed louvers. Fixed louvers because the windows what? Come in and go out. My father used to tell me as a child that it was the cowshed principle. Wind comes in on the east and goes out on the west. The AG and I just looked at this building coming down to you. When this building was built, where you see glass blocks now on the steps would have been the decorative blocks that we all now have blocked up. Look at it in here to accommodate that. Long before my time, air conditioner. So that if wind comes in and can't get out, what does it do? The pressure lifts everything. So in the manifesto, we talked about our seminal capital transformation project, which is Roofs to Reefs. And that's going to take more than a decade because we didn't get here, as you just heard me, even in 10 years. We got here over 60 years. And we have to change, therefore, starting with all new build. When you go to Bermuda, what do you see? The same types of roofs, because they are trying to deal with two things at the very least, apart from the aesthetics, which makes it absolutely charming. But they're trying to deal with the collection of water, and they're trying to deal with an island that is 14 by 1 mile in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that is also hit by hurricanes. 14 by 1 mile. So that those roofs that they build are determined by their environment, and how do they withstand, how do they become resilient to the environment within which they live. And we have to pause and go back there. In the Chattel House cases, most of the roofs were gables. In the case of the wall bungalows, as they were called in those days, which were all over the country, we see them, those built in the before the 1950s and 60s in particular, you had the hip roof predominantly, or sometimes you would get like a parapet and inside the roof. So the first thing we have to do is to change how we build. Cabinet today agreed that the Minister of Housing would issue requests for proposals, and we would have a town hall meeting with the architects and engineers, I hope a week from Monday, that will allow us to be able to start the process and to alert them that in the same way that almost every house built by low income people in Barbados has the same house design. You ever study it? For the last 50, 60 years, that we need to do our people and ourselves a favor and to put out at least 3 or 4 house designs for low income people and 3 or 4 house designs for lower middle income people. Okay? And then we need to have the Ministry of Public Affairs, once that contest is won as to whose designs we take from the architects and the engineers, that we need also, separate from what government sponsors as public housing, that we need to have the Ministry of Public Affairs do some videos and the Ministry of Education and Training do the training, so that our artisans and people who want to build on their own are given the tools to be able to prepare themselves for this new reality. That is point one, changing how we build. And we will, at the appropriate time, also work out how best we handle it from a regulatory perspective with town planning, as well as the new buildings authority, the building code, sorry, which we accept that if we were to try to be able to approve every single house design, there would be bureaucratic tyranny in this country. So that we need to be able, particularly with those over a certain size, to shift the liability to the professionals, the engineers, the architects, the quantity surveyors, who have a duty of care anyhow, as the Attorney General would tell you, to their clients to be able to build to certain specs. We have to do it as well for earthquakes, because the notion that Barbados is not vulnerable to earthquakes was put to rest for this current generation from 2007 and then again here recently, in a way that those who lived between the 1940s and 2007 would not have experienced a hurricane. The second thing, however, that we have to do is to clean up. When the hurricane warning, or watch for that matter, it was watch, was put in place, the tropical storm watch, we set about to fast forward in some of the work that the Ministry of Public Works would have been doing and continue to do, because let us tell the truth as well. Dorian came in August. And one of the examples of the new norm is that those things that we could have said wait till September as opposed to an October. June too soon. July, stand by. August, they used to tell you it must. But in our life, when did we ever see a hurricane in August of this ilk? September, remember, October, and now we're told That the all over is November 30th. So for us, November 30th will not only be Independence Day, but it is a freedom of the mind under pressure from the tyranny of the weather systems. So that the season has gotten longer as well and more intense. It means then that we have to be ready. And I want to ask Barbadians to think back to what their grandparents and great grandparents had to do, because there was no radiodiffusion that would advise them. There was no meteorological services that would have advised them that a system was coming. You go home, you asleep at night, and all of a sudden you start to hear wind whirling outside. What did our grandparents and great grandparents and their grandparents and great grandparents have to do? They had to be ready for any eventuality as far as possible. And they had, in doing that, they became a resilient people. We must now become a resilient people, not just Barbadians, but Caribbean people across the board. And that readiness, that resilience comes from us preparing ourselves for this in how we build, but also in how we keep around our environment. So that bush, my pet peeve, I've asked the Attorney General to move with dispatch for us to put a framework for ticketing, and he can speak more to it before we leave, for um, just rather than simply fines before the criminal court. But we're not interested really in making anybody a criminal. What are we interested in? That you clean up. And if you don't clean up, well, you must pay something to allow us to go and do it for you. It's as simple as that. I don't want to make anybody a criminal. He doesn't want to make anybody a criminal. But we want all the alleys, all the canals, all the water courses, all at you. Because one blow is do what? Kill or go. We want everybody just keep wrong you. To the front, to the side, to behind you. Keep it clean. And we want you to remove all missiles. And to that extent, we are opening back up, as we told you, Bagatelle, and we hope to have a similar bulky waste site for dumping soon also in the south of the island. Because the heavy cleanup must be now, because we know that very few people cleaned up for the last few years, and the government certainly did not do it. And Bagatelle was closed for what, 5, 6 years? So that the amount of old fridges and old stoves and old washing machines and other things that can be missed, as you've seen, the kinds of things that flew around in the Bahamas. And in the Bahamas, what went was not just wooden houses, the kind of wall houses, the kind of wall structures. Because remember, water is what? Water is coming at you with a force. That's why tsunamis, which is the extreme version of storm surge, is so destructive. And in the case of Nassau, I'm sorry, not Nassau, of Abaco, the settlement where the Haitians lived, called the mud, is as flat as the floor that you see in. No people lived in there. And how many? Enough. I don't know the exact number because I'm not sure that they know the exact number, but enough. Barbadians will understand what I mean, and Caribbean people when I say enough. Enough. I know where to go now. So the cleaning up is absolutely critical, because the cleaning up leads to flooding, and storm surge may be one way in which people can die, but people in Barbados know with Karoo that flooding doesn't only happen coming from storm surge, but flooding happens also when gullies, and Barbados has more gullies than anything else. They say we have a gully for each day of the year, just like Dominica has a river for each day of the year. When those gullies are blocked, what happens? Pressure build up, and when the water come down, look what happened to Carew that fateful night when we had the water. I will never forget because it was the same night that we were in the ministry till 4 o'clock in the morning, finishing up the white paper on education reform. And we left the ministry when the rain started, only to wake up to hear about Carew's death the next day. So cleaning up is critical. And the government will do its part, NCC will do its part, MTW will do its part. But with the best will in the world, the government, NCC, MTW cannot do it all. But the country can do it. And the country does it by Sandy, you cleaning up, by you which floods out there, by Howard's Land, not Howard's Land, Howard's Supermarket, Bushall Main Road. You look hard, what happens? If that has plastic blocking the drains and the wells out there, you got 2-3 feet of water and you can't pass that one patch on Bushall Main Road. And it's as much a function of how we live as anything else. We've put in an additional well there now at the corner. Hopefully it will help, but we don't know. And it can't help if people go and block it with garbage or plastic or concrete bags or thing. And I can forget about the adults a little bit and go to the children of this nation. And I hope that you all carry this for the children, not tomorrow, but next week or whenever they're listening. Because I want the children of Barbados, because it's your world that we're protecting. I want the children of Barbados to become the premier litter police for this country. And if you see your mother, your father, your grandmother, your grandfather, your uncle, your aunt, whoever, your teacher, remind them very politely, don't be rude, but remind them that you can't love me if you want to litter in my country. You can't want better for me if you want to litter in my country. You can't want, Shane, a Barbados for your son to be good if we have people blocking up and doing the things that they shouldn't do. And at a different level, because Barbados does not produce the level of sugarcane that it used to, it means that a lot of our plantations also have run to bush. And a lot of the cleaning and husbandry that used to take place in preparing for planting and the crop and everything doesn't now take place in the same way. So that the cuscus grass used to make sure that the mud didn't run on, the soil didn't run on the road. The cleaning of the wells used to make sure that the flooding didn't take place there. And when you compound that with more concrete, water runs easier on concrete. So you do the blockages and then you facilitate the thing. And then apart from cleanup, build, how we build must change, how we clean up must change. But here we now have to go beyond our borders. They say no man is an island. Well, this battle cannot be won alone by one island. But what we do know is that we in the region must take responsibility for our own affairs. We welcome and indeed we want the outside assistance. But what we must have even before outside assistance is that we must be able as independent countries to be able to satisfy ourselves that we can become our own first responders as far as possible and as efficiently as possible. And we can't do it one. And that's why SEDIMA and other agencies like the RSS and others are so critical. We have to be prepared to stand with each other because it's only a question of when. Today is Bahamas. 2017 was Barbuda, was Dominica, was British Virgin Islands, was St. Martin. The Premier of St. Martin has come here twice. Yesterday I was with the Premier from Turks and Caicos. Tortola was a wreck in 2017. We saw the boats in Tortola looking like what, little toy boats? Like, oh, you have toy boats and toy cars. And they were all like if a little child just took them and arranged them. So, what we know is that we have, as Caribbean people and as Caribbean nations, to be there with one another. The difficulty is that even with us doing that, we have to go beyond the resources of government and to allow, first and foremost, one, our populations to know that old saying. What was that old saying that we learned as a child? That you have to do what? Save for what? You all finish it before I could even finish it. Save for a rainy day. That those habits have to come back again at the individual household level. First thing. And saving at a rainy day at an individual household level, we have to do it also at the national level. And that's why a previous Barbados Labour Party government passed the legislation for a catastrophe fund. And we're going to have to revisit it because I'm satisfied that even the rate at which it is accumulating is not sufficiently fast, given what we have to face. But even with all of that, it is unlikely to be enough because once insurance claims start to come in the Bahamas, what do you think is going to happen to insurance premiums? Up, up, up. And it is largely because the pool is too small. My government, therefore, is going to, over the course of the next few months, work to stage in Barbados an international colloquium, inviting not just members and other representatives from the region in government, but also those on other frontline states to this new reality. If you look at it, the governors of the states moving from Texas right across to Florida in the Gulf, and those moving from Florida on the eastern seaboard right up to New England on the eastern seaboard, and even those in the provinces in Canada on the eastern seaboard are at risk, even though we accept that those at the outer edges are less likely, like Barbados, to experience it. The countries in Central America are equally affected. Mexico, Belize, Honduras, etc. And then the mayors of a number of key cities are equally affected. And we have come to accept, therefore, that what we have to do is to enlarge the pool of insurance in order to ensure that insurance remains relevant and affordable for us as citizens living in this part of the world. Make no mistake about it, we understand that we are on the front line of the battle, even though we did not cause it. It is not us, we don't have enough industrial production to have made holes in the ozone layer or to cause global warming. But we know that if the Earth's temperatures rise beyond 1.5 degrees, that we are going to see even worse consequences. Your children and your grandchildren. And that's why the allies for me in this battle are not simply the governments of the world, but the children and young people of the world. And I am making bold to say that we are not going to be constrained by the geographical boundaries of Barbados in seeking to raise support for the changes that have to come about. Our target is a global audience, and our target equally are Caribbean based governments and institutions, whether of countries or of states or of provinces or of towns and cities, because that's where the action is taken at the municipal level, at the state level, and then, of course, at the federal level. But equally, like all great battles, you don't win it straight off. And when the church was being built, the failure of those who surrounded the church to accept the validity and the wisdom of what they were trying to do meant that in the Bible we read that where two or three are gathered, in His name, there is worthiness in the effort. So Barbados expects and anticipates that not everyone will convert, because if they had, the world would not now be facing these diabolical consequences. In Zimbabwe, as we speak, Zimbabwe this year has had floods, and now it is in the middle of a drought. California and parts of Europe have seen some of the most horrific fires that cause people to lose their lives and all of their property. And I don't know which is worse, to die by fire or to die from waves, water. But both are horrific. So that we can sit back here and wait for somebody to bring a solution as Caribbean people, or we can take responsibility for our destiny. And there is no doubt in my mind after seeing what we saw in the Bahamas yesterday. I'm reminded of what Dominica and Barbuda saw, and the notion of climate refugees becoming part of our lexicon in the region. That the time for urgent action is now. We will therefore be reaching out to a number of partners to be able to fuel this international colloquium, to discuss how best to address issues of insurance and saving and financing, both one to build resilience, but equally as important, to fight the actual consequences of these catastrophic events. Because if we don't plan for it at a policy level, from a financing perspective, we're not going to be able to get through. The CRIF, Caribbean Catastrophe Fund, which last year you would have seen us receive some money for Tropical Storm Kirk, exists and it helps a little bit, but it's nowhere near our own domestic catastrophe fund, and others I'm sure have similar arrangements. It is nowhere near what is needed. And as a result, therefore, the major takeaway at a regional and international level is that we are no longer simply prepared to accept our fate without fight back. We are going to have to do better and to prepare for this new reality of the 21st century for our people. And for us not to do so would be to leave our people and our countries exposed, granted, to Mother Nature, but in ways that will become far worse if we do nothing, and much better if we intervene to change how we live, how we govern, how we behave, how we finance with respect to this. Simply to reflect on the tragedy of the circumstances is to accept that we must perpetually become victims, and eventually our civilization will be obliterated. That is not what any of us were born to do. Not you, not me, not any of us. And if Barbados has to start it, we will. And if we have to be able to ask others to join, we will. And if it takes time and I am no longer in this chair and others are continuing, we shall. But this is our new reality in the region. So I look forward to being able to give you more details as we unfold the plans for this colloquium. I intend to speak to a number of regional and international leaders and bodies for us to plan to have this intervention. We have already, in the restructuring of our bonds, when we restructured our debt, domestic debt last year, we took the opportunity to include a natural disaster clause. There are very few financial instruments or bonds in the region. Grenada did it when they restructured their debt too. And what that means is that if a storm or a hurricane of a certain size or scale hits us, that we will be able to postpone for 2 years the payment of principal and that we will postpone the payment of interest but capitalize the interest for those 2 years and put it on to the back end of the loan. So what do you get? You get little elbow room for 2 years to spend the money that you would have spent on debt in the rebuilding of the country. And that is what you need when you have a tragedy. When you have a difficulty home at you, money that you would have used to pay the insurance or to buy something that you needed to a washing machine that you were going to replace, you got to put it one side and use the other money now to fix the hole in the roof or the windows that broken because of the storm to stop you from getting wet when the day come or when the night come. And all we've done is to transfer that form of behavior. And now Barbados's domestic debt bonds, which is about 80% of our domestic debt, now has those clauses. We are trying to do the same with our restructured commercial foreign debt too, because it makes sense. And let me tell you why. We can either do it orderly or it will happen in a disorderly fashion. Because if the place get mashed up, how you gonna find money to pay the debt? And that's why in most contracts you also have force majeure clauses, because we accept that what is the herb, the flow to be able to contribute to the Bahamian people. On Sunday, and we advised the Prime Minister Minis and his colleagues that the Barbadian people will have a telethon. I think yesterday, Minister Moore and Ambassador Comijong spoke to it. And I am saying to Barbadians in particular, and through you, please, that this one is particularly special for us because Dorian started here. And we, more than anyone else, know, even more than the people in the Carolinas and elsewhere where Dorian has continued to go, that we got off virtually unscathed from Dorian. But if Dorian had hit us, imagine what each of us would have had to spend, all like now, to be surviving. And however little and however difficult it is for both individuals, and Jano that I know, we can do a little something. We're in an IMF program, but my government has agreed that we will match whatever Barbadians put at the very least on Sunday. And therefore, I would like us to see at least $500,000, at least $500,000 donated by Barbadians on Sunday towards the people of the Bahamas. And know this, that if that first weekend, the tale of Dorian was different, it would be others doing for us what I'm asking Barbadians to do for Bahamians. Secondly, we've agreed that any requests for assistance from the regional security system, that Barbados will play a major role in the supply of any troops that are needed to be able to assist the Bahamian people in maintaining law and order, because the two most important things in stabilization after a hurricane are one, law and order to prevent looting and crime, and two, to prevent public health outbreaks because of water and stagnant and bodies and other chemicals and things that we just don't know what happens when they mix. Um, and therefore, we will play whatever role that the Bahamians ask us to. Understand this as well, that I feel for my colleague Prime Minister Minis, because the pressure of everybody's expectations coming at you at one and the same time means that in order to prioritize, you will disappoint. But you have to prioritize and save the national interest first and foremost. And the national interest first and foremost is by keeping a safe society and then by minimizing the chances for any public health outbreaks, even before you get to the other things of cleanup and rebuilding, etc. So whatever they have to tell us, the worst thing is for everybody to decide we sending that when in truth and in fact they need this. So we have to be patient and allow them to do the assessment. Yesterday we were present when they did the briefings, and I'm satisfied. I think the AGU can say that the briefings they are doing what they have to do, but they're equally constrained by the capacity. In flying over the Bahamas yesterday, even for me, I became acutely aware of the vastness. And when we were flying back down, I looked at it. When you look at the width of Grand Bahama, crudely so, it is virtually the same width of the state of Florida. Not the same depth or square footage, but it's the same width. And when you look at the length of Abaco, it's virtually the same length as the width of Grand Bahama. And we flew over for what, almost 2.5 hours? 3 hours. Just looking because we still couldn't land properly. They were hoping to be able to get in there today on the ground. And we left Prime Minister Chasney and the Premier of Turks and Caicos, but I had to come back to meet with the IMF this morning. So the bottom line is that we will, as a government, match what the people of Barbados do at the very least. And I hope at the very least that we can have at least $500,000 from the people of Barbados on Sunday. The money does not come to the government of Barbados. We don't even want it to touch us. We want it to go straight to Sedima's account. Sedima has agreed to open a special Sedima Barbados Bahamas bank account. I've explained to the country already that I don't think we should be doing donations in kind because the logistics, we tried to carry some tarpaulins up yesterday. The plane could only carry a few. But the bottom line is that what they need now really is cash to be able to do a lot of the things that they need to do. So our contribution will be monetary, matching our people at the very least, and it will also be technical and manpower in terms of any support services that are required. And we will await any further requests should it arise based on the outcome of their needs assessment, which is really only now being conducted because of the complexity of being able to conduct that. If it was one landmass, you send some people up there, or send boat round, and boom, 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 boom. It's not that simple in the Bahamas, and we have to give them time to be able to do it. When I see the international media goading people and trying to say, when the government isn't doing this and the government isn't doing that, and in truth and in fact, when you get on the ground, you realize that the government is doing a lot more than people are trying to suggest. I have some sympathy and empathy for my colleague and for the people of the Bahamas. Um, Against that background, therefore, I ask us to recognize that our future will be different, as I've said, but at the same time, let us play our part in supporting those who need our assistance as we go forward. The rains yesterday afternoon reminded us that our difficulties don't only come in the form of structured storms, but that, as I said, we have to be ready for any eventuality. And that's a partnership. And why have I spoken this long? Because at the end of the day, the people of Barbados have to understand through you the logic of what we are doing and what we're asking. And the people of the Caribbean and wider have to understand through you the logic of why we are saying that our reality must be different and that we have as a region now to change how we build, to change how we clean up around us, to change how we finance and prepare for the financing of one, becoming more resilient, but two, also fighting the battles after the catastrophe. It is why we want roofs to reefs to be characteristic of our term as a government, because each of us who do not have roofs that are adequate, we will have to work with you by showing you the designs, by helping you to save on a lot of that technical work, the money you would have to spend. The government is going to get those designs done, and we're going to try to have the engineers and the architects work with us in this battle. But at the same time, We're going to have to work with the banks and the financial sector and the credit unions to allow a lot of you to be able to change out your roofs, because you're going to pay for a disaster before or after. And it is far cheaper to pay for it before, not to mention, it is far easier to protect your life and yourself from injury if you make sure that that roof stays on. If it goes in the storm, you're at risk, and all of that you own in that house is at risk. So if instead of doing something else, you got to change your roof, make that the priority. If you got to put in a water tank, as we're asking people to do, and to work with the water authority, we're trying to put the mechanisms in place where the water authority can help people to get the water tanks, you do. And why? Don't let us fool ourselves. Part of the problem that we face in this country as a water scarce country is a global issue. Go on YouTube and look for the documentary or Netflix that talks about the global crisis in groundwater. And you will see the same problem in India, the same problem in Peru, the same problem in Kansas, the same problem in Morocco, where we just came from, where we went and visited the water museum. And part of the difficulty is that we are extracting groundwater as a population in the world far quicker, at a far quicker rate than it's being replenished. And when you dig deep and you pull it out, the salinity in the water increases, in which case then you can't use it in that way. So that's why you see the proliferation of desalination plants and other things, because the groundwater is being affected globally. How we live has to change. And that's why my allies, my friends, must be the children of this country and the children of the world. In a very real sense, I would like to believe that I can live to 100, but I don't feel that will. So, what do we have to do? Build a bridge for those who will be here 40 and 50 and 60 years from now. AG, I've said a lot, but there are some things that I think, from a legal perspective, and just your general comments, because without us using the law to move from a governmental response to a national response, we're not going to be in a position to win this battle. And that is why we're not only using money spending, expenditure of money, fiscal policy, but also legislation and regulations to allow us to win this battle. AG?
Yeah, thank you very much, Prime Minister. In relation to Bahamas, I would only want to observe that it was truly uh, a tragic scene. But the one advantage that I think the Bahamas has going for it is that New Providence Island, which is where Nassau is largely untouched. So what we saw when we landed was a government shell shock, but it might have been a government that could still function because they had a space, airports, banks, a whole infrastructure that was still fully operational. We wouldn't have that luxury in Barbados if Barbados suffered that kind of hit. Just about everything would be gone, and I think it's important for us to reflect on that. In terms of the kind of legislative framework that we would want to implement to ensure that the needed things get done in Barbados, perhaps the centerpiece of it would be some amendments to our health service regulations, which date back to 1969. Uh, at that time, of course, the issues were very different, but even then, the idea of individuals being made responsible in law for cleaning up areas, maintaining not just sanitary conditions, but getting rid of bush, getting rid of garbage, all these kinds of things. These are not new. The Prime Minister is constantly talking about it now, but as far back as 1969, the regulations were there. Over the years, though, it seems as though we've paid less and less attention to it. But certainly last year when we had to deal with Kirk, looking at the simple cause of major flooding in the Orleans area, largely because drains had been blocked with plastic bags, largely because areas that should have been cleared of grass and bush had not been cleared of grass and bush. So a small ministerial committee made up of the Minister of Health, Minister of Public Works, Minister of the Environment, and myself We'll be looking at the health service regulations over the next week or two to see how we can make the appropriate amendments to ensure that Barbadians once again are encouraged to take care of their open spaces. But if they do not, then we want to make sure that the government is able to move in, deal with those things, and to ensure that the homeowner or the owner of the real estate will pay the price. We're not interested, as the Prime Minister said, in making anybody a criminal, but we do have to motivate people towards the kind of conduct that staves off disaster and challenges for a government. The Prime Minister reflected today on the fact that just a week ago we had to call in individuals to clear drains and gutters and so on. That should that it simply should not have been that way. These are the things that we should be doing in the ordinary course of our business. So it has come to that point. We're going to simply have to put new legislative measures in place. We will be imposing a set of civil fines to try to encourage Barbadians to engage in the appropriate kind of conduct. Very much, the Prime Minister calls it ticketing offense. It's very much like an offense of parking in the wrong place. It doesn't get ramped up to a criminal procedure at that point. You have an opportunity to pay the fine and make amends. And that's the approach that we want to use in this instance. And also, you will see that approach rolled out across many other areas of our law. We still have a few more months to go before we're out of this tourist season, before we're out of this hurricane season. But we're hopeful to be able to get this new legislative platform in place within fairly short.
And you're going to review the catastrophe fund legislation too.
Yes, the catastrophe fund we think is still remains a viable tool for helping individuals to get back on their feet. The last administration had made a move to abolish the fund. We resisted it at that point in time, and we think that it was absolutely the wise decision when we implemented it, and the wise decision to resist its repeal. You might not remember, but the catastrophe fund is governed by a piece of legislation which provides that if a catastrophe, whether it's in form of a fire, a hurricane, a flood, whatever it is, causes an individual to substantially lose their home, they would be able to apply to the fund in the event that they have no insurance so that they can get themselves back on their feet. One of the important things must always be that individuals must have avenues to help themselves first, so that the central government would always be free to help those who simply don't have the opportunity to do so. And that fund, we're going to reactivate that. I think it still has a fair amount of dollars in
over
it.
30 million.
But
that's still
in
not
a hard
enough.
hit situation, $30 million, believe me,
drop.
will not go very far.
I think the point you made about the insurance, helping yourself first. And that's why, if I had to give you one takeaway from this press briefing, it's really on the insurance. Because that's the big one that threatens to capsize our civilization. The English-speaking Caribbean is simply too small in terms of population and size to give us the size of the pool that is necessary to face the kinds of continuous risk that we face now, simply every year for at least 4 months of the year. You understand that 1/3 of the year, every year, you are at risk. Now that's a hell of a thing. So how do you minimize that risk? You become resilient, you change how we build, you change how we clean up, you change those other things. But we will never have the money to rebuild sufficiently if we don't change the size of the pool of insurance. And that means that we need to be talking to the people from Texas, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, going right to Virginia, Mexico, Honduras, Dominican Republic, Cuba. You getting me? Colombia. We need, well, no, Colombia is too far south, sorry. Because really and truly, after Barbados, luckily, and Tobago, Trinidad and Suriname and Guyana are virtually unscathed. when it comes to the risk of hurricanes. So the ones above us, and then as far west as Central America, and as far north as the coastal states of the United States of America and the provinces of the eastern seaboard of Canada. Those are the frontline states and cities.
And
So we need that pool,
final
that
word on
insurance
that
pool,
is
and that colloquium.
it was quite evident that the government of the Bahamas has in mind that they're going to be looking towards the proceeds of those insurance policies being put back into the economy in very short order, so as to be able to begin to see economic activity
Exactly.
in those devastated regions. Fortunately for them, given the kind of homes and the average um, worth of the individuals who would have been affected, most
And
of those
some,
properties would
and
have been
some of the Abaco, but not
Abaco,
not
yeah.
the settlement camps.
No, the settlement camp was a squatter settlement basically, but because of the high rate of insurance, they have something to look forward to. The other matter that I'm going to mention to you, though we're asking that
We'll do that after,
oh, sorry, okay.
because we're going live now. There's one matter I'm asking the media to stay on so we can share some information on you on another matter, which we'll embargo till tomorrow night, and then you can announce on Sunday. Are there any questions for us?
I just
Thank
want to
you.
mention on CBC News. Prime Minister Mottley, I felt when you said that Barbados is now during the brunt of a natural crisis that we did not create.
The Caribbean, not
The
Barbados.
Caribbean. The image in my mind was almost like every hurricane season we were going to play Russian roulette on who gets hit by which system
Exactly.
each year. So when you spoke about stuff like the house designs and the cleanup and being able to respond to ourselves, and the AG mentioned about the civil fines in legislation. It's a new norm, as you pointed out. Is the government satisfied that Barbadians are going to respond to civil fines? Because it feels like to me like when people talk about indiscriminate verdict, and is it sufficient? Do you feel it's sufficient for what?
Who has been elected to lead? We have to lead, and we have a mandate to lead, and we have to. And if I know that you're about to step in front of a high-speed train on the tracks, I have a duty to inform you and to try to stop you from doing it. If you break way because I happen to be looking to stop Roy from doing it as well, then I can't control it. And you will face the consequences of your action. And I want this country and I want you all to help because, I've asked for a session with the journalists and also the media because you all really are builders of a democracy. And I want us to recognize that public education is as much our duty now as anything else. And that's why I want the children, because children are faithful in any task that they adopt. Not true? A child will harass. I tell you, that's why I don't smoke no more. You understand? So it's not if Barbadians will respond, it's if we will ensure that we change our environment. If you don't respond, you'll face the consequence of not responding. Okay? And we have to lead. And what has happened in this country, regrettably, for too long, is that we've not led. So that people do as they like. But when you do as you like, you affect him and her and me and everybody else. So that part and parcel of allowing the rule of law, as the AG would tell you, to obtain is because we need stability and we need to avoid anarchy. Okay, and in this instance, we now know that the consequences of littering and blocking drains and all of these things are patent. We don't even need a storm to tell us that. We just need some little heavy rain, and we know the consequences of it. So, at what point do we take responsibility as adults and do that which is necessary? And I'm saying to you that the government is also stepping up to the plate because we're not trying to make people criminals by any means. What we're simply saying is that if you don't pay to do it, we're gonna have to pay to do it for you. And I'm not gonna take money from educating your children or treating your grandmother in the hospital or building roads to stop you from having to replace your shocks and all those other things simply because the next person refuses to accept the responsibility of ownership. If you own a house and you don't maintain it, what happens to it? Just fall down. But therefore, don't only look at the physical walls, look at the grass outside, look at the gutters outside, because that's what you own too. And the privilege of ownership carries with it responsibilities. And the responsibility that ownership carries is that you must maintain what you own. What's the first responsibility of maintaining? To ourselves, to our bodies, we maintain how we look, what we do, what we eat, how we exercise, how we do all of those things. And we each don't always make 100%. John, no, look at me. I try hard. Okay. But the bottom line is that I'm not going to stop trying, even if I have complications as I do with my thyroid. Okay. So that the lesson then is it stay the course and recognize that we don't only live in this country for ourselves, we live among people, our family, our community, and the nation.
I got the sense too that you might have been wondering whether the civil penalty element of it is appropriate in the circumstances. Is that correct?
I don't think it'd be appropriate, but I just mean people's psyche.
Well,
I mean that they're not ready
the
for
law,
it.
Yeah.
but the law no.
Because what he's trying to tell you is that people complain about everything.
Yes.
Yeah, they are. But the law as it stands says if you allow bush to grow on your land and it's a nuisance, you're liable to a fine of $5,000. But to be practical, that requires a prosecution
And to get
in
in
a court,
magistrate's court.
which takes up time. It helps to create more problems of backlog in our judicial system. The world over, people live in communities where if they don't cut their lawn, they know that they're going to receive a fine for it, and they routinely go and cut their lawn. I'm sure we all have relatives who live in that kind of environment.
And we go to Toronto, or we go to the States, or we go to Europe, or we do it.
Yeah, but it reduces the administrative backlog. It takes pressure off the court system. It takes pressure off our police, over our public servants. We have public health inspectors. They can make the assessment, issue you with a ticket, and you would only trigger a criminal proceeding in the event that your behavior is so contemptuous of authority that over a period of time you simply refuse to do it. In addition to that, we're also going to be looking seriously at making those kinds of penalties charges on your land. In the same way that if you don't pay your water bill, it'll be a charge on your land. If you don't pay your land tax, it'll be a charge on your land. We're not interested in criminalizing people. We just want to motivate them towards reasonable conduct for their own benefit and for the benefit of society at large.
To be a good Bajan citizen, because we gotta live out here.
We hope
all
never
have
to
to.
have to levy a penalty on anybody.
That's the point.
We're not just going into regathering 2020. We're trying to encourage people to change the way in which they behave.
Mm-hmm.
These references to the law will always be the last resort.
I have a couple questions.
Yes,
And I
ma'am.
was going in front of this habitat.
Y'all may have to speak loudly because Roy, we really need to make sure that we have mic for those who are being streamed. Yeah.
That we will get your approval on. We will get everything else.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, when you spoke up, you said that we have to change the way we build. So one of my questions would be, are we then going to be looking at a mandatory building code? Because yes, we would have the building code, but are we going to move in that direction where it has to be mandatory?
We're moving in that direction, certainly with respect to the roofs and the stability, etc. Part of the problem is that the last government would have put in place the building code, but the legislation has never been passed to make it mandatory. We have a difficulty with a building code that requires everybody to go to a new building authority, put in an application, and then for the building authority to have to inspect things. What we are hoping to do is to work with the architects and engineers, because we also have people of practical affairs. As I said, every Almost every wooden house in every community in Barbados look like the next. Not true? LA? They look like the next. So Bajans have used a few house designs as a model. And they've been trained to it. The carpenters know how to build that model. The masons know how to build that model. And on some instances, they can close their eyes and do it. So we get it. So we want to have the RFP, and Minister Payne is going to put out the advertisement after we meet with the architects and engineers. Um, our housing program, which we'll talk about another day, is going to be ramping up in a major way soon. But we're going to use that as well as the videos and the training sessions to be able to train Barbadians to a new norm. A new norm.
My second question now is relation. I remember, I think it was Prime Minister Chastney when he issued his statement as chairman of CARICOM regarding the situation in Bahamas. And he spoke of a resilience foundation, something that was discussed at the last meeting of the heads of government. How feasible do you see that for the
We're waiting for the details. So I don't necessarily want to comment on it at this point in time. Um, but he is, and I'm supporting his efforts to be able to build out the Resilience Foundation, because that's a way. Part of the difficulty is that when we have to borrow to rebuild after a hurricane, what we borrow goes into our debt to GDP ratio, and then we're told that it's unsustainable. So we become victims of our geographic location and victims of the actions of others in the developed world over which we've had no control. So that's what Prime Minister Chastney is trying to deal with there. I'm saying separate from that, that's fine, we're going to work that. But I also need us to address the very real issue of insurance. There are too many people in the Caribbean who are not acquiring hurricane insurance because the premiums are simply prohibitive and will continue to be even worse. So that the major investment which you have in life, the average family, is at risk. And can you find the money to go and rebuild a house overnight? So, and if you're over 45 or 50, then the bank can tell you that you can't qualify for a mortgage again, and you're in potter. So you will see the pauperization of families if we don't solve this issue. And you may want to know why, therefore, I treat this as even more important than the other things, because the other things we're going to continue apace, the ticketing for the bush and the new building, how we build, etc. But on this insurance thing, we need to work in partnership, regionally and internationally, with frontline states that are affected, so that we expand the pool. And that's why I'm going to be working, as I said, with international organizations. I first raised this issue at a meeting that we had with the IMF a couple months ago, and the World Bank, and with a lot of the other international financial, the American Development Bank and other organizations there. But I'm satisfied that it can no longer be an issue that we talk about in conferences or in tangentially in meetings, and that we need to have a specific engagement, and that's why I call it a colloquium, where we discuss this, and out of this comes a series of policy measures and things that can be executed to make insurance more affordable, ultimately against the risk, the increased risk that we're facing, and to be able to allow us to save more for that rainy day that we are certain will come. The only question is when it comes. And secondly, to recognize that what we save, we need to do in a cooperative fashion, so that in a meet and turn way. Why do we use a meet and turn? To use a meet and turn, you need 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, how many ever of us? But each one takes its turn. And it means that my contribution this week helps you. Your contribution next week helps me. So that whatever we save for ourselves, we must keep a little piece to be able to help one another regionally. Because what we have as our own, in each case nationally, is insufficient to meet the consequences of these catastrophic storms. We just don't have it alone on our own.
Oh, okay.
And that's why I also talk about us being Caribbean as first responders. So working with SEDIMA and the RSS, we have to go in there and we have to order our business that also have the kind of equipment and the kind of skill sets that If the others come, I welcome the British, I welcome the French, I welcome the Americans, I welcome everyone. But at the end of the day, when we became independent, what did we do? We assume responsibility for ourselves. And as Caribbean people, brothers and sisters, we have to work in a family. What your mother and fathers tell you, don't forget about your brother. When I go along, don't forget about your sister. Not true? I want to know that you're taking care of each other when I go along. It's the same principle from Bahamas in the north to Guyana and Suriname in the south. From Barbados in the east to Belize in the west. We have to take care of each other.
Racial alienation. Going back to the issue of cleaning, um, generally, as far as I know, if I have a lot next door to me where the bush has been overgrown and people have been dumping and that sort of stuff, I could usually call the polyclinics to come and assist. In recent times, that has stopped. Along with what is going to be put in place, will they also be coming back on board, or that is no longer an avenue to explore in terms of cleaning up and
What we're talking about will be updating and upgrading the health services regulations, and those regulations are administered by the public health officers. So we're not changing any of those structures; those will still remain the same. But we are now, rather than making this the responsibility of the public health officers to come out and and then start a whole process. We are looking to put the burden more on the householder, but the public health inspectors will still play a vital role in this, and they're still at the polyclinics.
And I think your broader question too is not so much the polyclinics alone, but SSA too and others. Where we can help, those who can't help themselves, we will, in addition. But it cannot be the primary and only way, as the AG said, for the collection of garbage. We need people to do for themselves first, and then we will also help do. Yeah?
I have one more question.
All like Friday evening press conferences.
Cabinet isn't finished.
Yeah, we go back up to cabinet too.
Just a short. You're telling us that this is a new norm. 4 months of the year, we're seeing more activity, but we've also seen systems forming as early as April. We had a year where there was severe rain in December. So it's almost as if there's a 12-month period now. There's no hurricane season
I
per
thank you
se.
for making the point, because what you're really saying is that outside of hurricanes, there are other climatic events that happen that can make life worse for us. And perhaps the worst of all is the drought that we're going through, because we too are going through a drought. Okay. So, and in fact, cabinet agreed to extend the drought conditions, the drought mitigation measures for another 2 months. It's 2 months today, from the beginning of September, going forward. Okay, because we accept that we're going through that. So I thank you for reinforcing my point. That is really not just a 4 month vigilance, but a 12-month vigilance that's required. All right. Anything else? We good? I want to wish you all a good weekend. I promise not to make Friday evening press conferences in the new norm. But on this occasion, I think you and all of us agree that the visit yesterday was virtually mandatory on our part. And we end by saying that I want Barbadians to sleep for the next 2 nights and to think how best we can reflect our support while at the same time giving thanks for our blessings not to have been more seriously affected. And once the country, whatever the country does, we will try to at least match it, because we need to be able to get those funds to our brothers and sisters in the Bahamas. Okay, thank you very much.